How do you get paid from an independent film distributor? I'm going to be answering that question here today on part 2 of my film distribution series. Part 1, we talked about the different terminologies as far as distribution, when it comes to streaming, like SVOD and TVOD and AVOD, and, how you can make money with theatrical, what exclusive rights are, and basically just breaking down the terminology and all of that. In this video, we're going to be talking about understanding revenue splits between distribution. So, how you're actually going to get paid from a distributor if you land some sort of distribution deal. In full disclosure, there is a longer version that already has this. So, if you've already watched the long version, you can skip this video. This is just an abridged version to make this a little bit more digestible for those who can't watch a super long video. So, without further ado, let's get into revenue splits for independent film distribution. All right, I probably shouldn't start it with this one because it's less common than the other method, but number one, a minimum guarantee. How this works, a distributor will pay you a lump sum upfront in exchange for the rights to distribute your film, either globally or within specific territories. I feel like this is a lot more common in music. There's actually a clip that I saw of Jelly Roll, the musician Jelly Roll, talking about, a deal that he made, or a deal that he knew of, or something like that, or a common just deal in the music industry where like a record label will pay you a fee up front. So say like $500,000, but then they'll start charging expenses on the back end before you start seeing any revenue from whatever your agreed split is. That's basically what this is. Unfortunately, like I said, this is very, very uncommon these days. It's starting to come back a little bit depending on the platform. But if you are getting a minimum guarantee, just know that's probably the only money you're ever going to see, from your release. So if make sure it covers whatever, your budget is, or whatever you got to pay your investors back if you decide to go this route. So like if a distributor's like, if you made your movie for $100,000 and the distributor's like, we'll give you $1,000 minimum guarantee, that's obviously garbage, right? That's not going to really help you. But to continue, once the film is released, the distributor will recoup the minimum guarantee, or MG as it's commonly referred to, from the revenue before paying you any additional earnings. The MG is deducted from future royalties until the distributor makes back the advance, only that after you begin earning any additional revenue. So for an example, a distributor offers you a $100,000 minimum guarantee for North American rights. Your film earns $300,000 in a gross, while the distributor recoups the $100,000 first. So, now that $300,000 turns into $200,000, and then along with expenses and their revenue split before you see an additional profit. So let's just say they charge like 50, just to make these numbers simple. They'll charge $50,000 in marketing expenses, right? And this may be ongoing too. So if this happens, you'll need to ask for receipts to make sure they're being honest about what they're spending. But, it'll be, say you have like a 50, to make these numbers simple, let's just say you have a 50-50 split with the distributor. That's a terrible deal, but let's just keep it simple so I can do the math easily. So if your film earns $300,000, first, they're going to take out that $100,000 from that minimum guarantee to pay themselves back. So now your revenue is only $200,000. And then after that, they charge the marketing expenses, which they need to recoup back first. So $50,000, like I mentioned. So now that $300,000 went down to $200,000, and with minus $50,000, that brings it down to $150,000, right? And then after that, that is when you start seeing your revenue split, which would be the 50-50. So their 50% doesn't even go into all the fees that I talked about. You got to pay back everything else before you start even making your revenue split. So we have a 50-50 deal now down. The revenue is now $150,000. So we would make $75,000. Well, this is an extreme example because I'm using big numbers. But if your film only makes $5,000, well, then you could start seeing the problem of not seeing any money, which is very common for filmmakers. So if a filmmaker's like, my distributor sucks, I never see any money, that's why. Because if they got a minimum guarantee, which they probably didn't, but the expenses is a lot more common. So if a distributor's like, we're going to charge you $10,000 in marketing expenses, and your film only makes $5,000, and that's the only money it makes ever, then you're never going to see a dime of that money. And that's why filmmakers will say, I never get paid. I've never gotten paid from my movie or whatever, right? So the pros of the minimum guarantee is that it's guaranteed income. You'll receive money up front. But like I said, that's probably the only revenue you're ever going to see. Risk reduction. So it provides immediate funding to pay off production debts or invest in marketing or just pay your investors back if you had any investors. And then industry validation, getting an MG signals that the distributor has confidence in your film's earning potential, which is definitely a positive, right? But the cons are the long recoup period. The distributor takes all the revenue until the MG is recouped, which could take months or years. Potential no back-end profit, like I had mentioned before. Loss of rights. In some cases, you may be giving up long-term distribution rights in exchange for the MG. So you may be getting they may say like, hey, we'll give you $100,000, but, we want a 30-year term on exclusivity, right? So, if your distributor sucks and you never make any money, well, then you can't do anything with your movie for 30 years, right? Which is, that's a whole mortgage on a house. So that's not always great. So if you are taking an MG, just make sure it's either making you money and expect that that'll be the only money that you make, or it at least needs to cover your initial costs, and then everybody gets paid back. Now, the most common method would be revenue splits after expenses. So how this works, you and the distributor agree on a revenue split. So in the example that I mentioned previously, just to keep it simple, 70 or 50-50, but a more common revenue split is 70-30 in the industry. I would say that's probably the most common with a traditional distributor, but you could have a 60-40 deal. You could have a 50-50 deal depending on who you're working with. All of my examples are going to be 50-50 just for easy math. But the distributor deducts their expenses first, which can include marketing costs, such as creating the trailers, posters, and the ads. And this is if they are doing all that for you. So some, distributors will create these marketing materials for you so you don't have to do it. Sales fees, so expenses for attending film markets, which obviously there are certain fees there, but, if they're buying a giant ribeye steak at the most expensive steakhouse at Cannes, then they're going to bill that to you, essentially. Legal fees and administrative fees, which that should be pretty, simple. And then delivery cost, converting the film to the required formats. So if they're creating the deliverables for you and then delivering those deliverables to the different platforms, which can have some costs too, which probably a legitimate cost, but you don't know what they're charging either unless, they're giving you a breakdown, which traditional distributors are notorious for not giving breakdowns, but we'll talk about that more later. So after these expenses are recouped, then the remaining revenue split happens according to the contract terms. So for an example, your film generates $500,000 in revenue. The distributor spends $200,000 on expenses, whether that's marketing, delivery, etc. So the remaining $300,000 is split 50-50 to keep this simple, right? Giving you $100,000. So there's some basics there. So if you're like, why my movie made $50,000, why am I not getting $250,000 of that? Well, that's why, because they need to, according to the contract terms, they need to recoup their expenses first. The pros of this is that there's no upfront rights sales, so you retain a lot more ownership and control since there's no lump sum payout. Potential for higher long-term profits. If your film performs well, you can make more over time compared to one-time minimum guarantee. This is less risky for distributors, so they don't have to pay anything up front, making them more likely to take on smaller indie films. Cons, delayed earnings. You might have to wait months or years to see a profit, especially depending on what they decide to charge for expenses. Opaque accounting. Some distributors inflate or pad their expenses, reducing the amount of back-end profit you receive, more famously known as Hollywood accounting. But like I said, if that distributor, that sales agent from the distribution company goes to Cannes and, buys a $1,500 dinner, that they didn't really need to buy, but they could do that, they're going to charge you for that. And you may have no idea that they charge you for that, because unless you get like a complete breakdown of what they spent, you're going to have no idea. Now that could be split up between several films, but you could still see the problem there, especially if somebody's greedy. Lack of guaranteed payment. If the film underperforms, obviously you may never see a dime. I mean, you may never see a dime regardless, but if the film just doesn't perform, you may never see a dime. But when is it worth it? Revenue splits make sense if you believe in your film's long-term earning potential. And if you have a solid marketing plan and are confident you could help drive sales, you could ultimately make more with a split than a minimum guarantee. So I guess I'm kind of an example of this. I'm not in the profit region yet. I'm pretty freaking close, but I haven't had a minimum guarantee. I just did with Film Hub. They do it an 80-20 split. So 80% to me, 20% to them. And I've made, I think, almost 11,000 back of my about $16,000 budget. So I still got to make about $5,000 left, but almost 2/3. I think I've made over 2/3 of the budget back. So, it's possible with the right marketing and the right film, right? I mean, if I could do it with a no budget indie drama, I'm sure you could do it with a horror movie that costs $1,000. So things you need to watch out for with your distribution deal. And this is going to be really important. So I would definitely pay attention to this section quite a bit. When negotiating with distributors, be aware of the terms and conditions surrounding both minimum guarantees and revenue splits. Key things to look out for include recoupable expenses. So ensure the content specifies what kind of expenses are recoupable, and caps. This is a big one, that it caps excessive costs. So, if they go and spend lavishly, you could say, well, our deal is that you could only spend $10,000 on marketing, but you're charging me for $15,000. Well, that extra $5,000 is on you guys, not on me, kind of thing. So there should be caps, and if there isn't a cap, you need to make sure you negotiate that cap in your contract. Without a cap, distributors could inflate expenses, making it harder for you to see any profit. Or like I said, famously, that's what Hollywood accounting is. Transparent reporting. Ask for regular and detailed reports on revenue and expenses. Now, a place like Indie Rights is notoriously known for having great reporting, but they don't charge any expenses. So you're just going to get the revenue expense. They don't charge you anything for expenses, which is really nice. For traditional distributors, this is going to be very difficult to get from them. They're notorious for just not doing this. So make sure you're doing your research before working with somebody if this is important to you. If you're just like, I'm just going to trust whatever they say, then I guess this all doesn't really matter. But if this is important to you, then this is something you need to ask for when, if you want to see that breakdown and making sure that they're honest. You could get some lawyers involved, but there's always some sort of shadiness to where they can kind of get around it. But I have heard if you harass people enough, and it, could get to a point, like I've heard of people who've had to walk into somebody's office and demand a report before they saw a report or a check or something. That's just the game. It sucks, which is why I haven't worked with a traditional distributor. And if I ever do in the future, they need to be really great, especially with everything I know. Ensure that you have the right to audit the distributor's records to prevent accounting abuse. So that's kind of what I was talking about. Territorial rights, make sure you retain the right to negotiate deals in other territories if you're only selling regional rights. So, if you're only interested in distributing in North America, make sure they don't have a section in there that's like, but we can actually distribute. We have the rights to everywhere else, so you can't do that yourself. Make sure you're paying attention to things like that. And this obviously prevents you from losing potential income from international sales. And then obviously the big one, the length of the agreement. Check the contract's term length. Some distributors lock in rights for 10 to 15 years, limiting your future earnings. Opt for shorter term deals like 3 to 5 years whenever possible. And they do exist. So just make sure you keep that in mind. It's fine if you want to renew with them, but just try to opt for those shorter deals if possible, because 15 years is a very long time. So key takeaways with choosing between MGs and revenue splits. For one, if an MG, if they even offer it to you, otherwise this doesn't really matter, but go with a minimum guarantee if you want guaranteed payment up front. Need funding immediately to pay off production debts, or, if you funded the film yourself, to go into another project. And if you're unsure about the film's long-term potential earnings, right? Option for a revenue split, this is probably going to be the more common method regardless, especially if you're watching this channel and making the films at the level that I'm talking about. If you believe in your film can earn consistently over time, prefer retaining more control and ownership, and you're confident that your ability to market and promote the film yourself. That wraps up part 2 of my independent film distribution series. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the different types of distribution. We're going to talk about the different distributors that you could work with and give some examples, as well as how you can actually do the self-distribution route as well. If you found this video helpful, definitely be sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video so that way it can reach more people who may need it. And if you want to help me out directly, my feature film Cashing Out will be linked in the description if you would like to check that out. And of course, I will have a couple videos linked on screen here. The next video should be linked on here by the time it comes out, or the entire video that this is a part of will be linked on screen as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.